Golden hour enters the Harvard-style library like it has permission to touch only what time is spared. In the beam of light, dust motes rise and fall above a closed hardcover book, each particle briefly visible before disappearing again. The retired professor watches them from an old wooden table, smelling old paper and leather, and for one quiet second he wonders if a human life can vanish the same way. Not loudly. Not tragically. Just shelved, unread, and slowly forgotten. That is the fear silence exposes. When the world no longer asks for your voice, do you still know how to be fully present? When the room is still, can you face what the noise used to protect you from? This is where Zanshin begins, not in battle, but in attention. Not by escaping the fear of being forgotten, but by learning how to stand correctly inside it. The retired professor does not move for a long time. His hand rests beside the hardcover book, close enough to open it, close enough to pretend he came here for research, close enough to make the old habit look alive. But the truth is simpler and harder. He came because the library still remembers a version of him that the outside world has stopped asking for. The long tables are nearly empty. Somewhere above him, the heating system breathes through the vents with a low, patient sound. A cart rolls faintly in a distant aisle. Pages turn in another room, soft as dry leaves. The smell of old paper and leather sits in the air like a history that refuses to leave. Golden hour presses through the tall windows and lays a clean stripe of light across the table. The dust motes move inside it. They do not hurry. They do not explain themselves. They rise, drift, fall, disappear, return. For a man who spent his life building arguments, grading minds, guiding young voices through difficult books, the silence almost feels like an accusation. No one needs his lecture today. No one is waiting outside his office. No student is leaning in the doorway, asking one last question before Thanksgiving break. No colleague is waving him over after a seminar. No young scholar is underlining his old comments in the margin with a mix of irritation and gratitude. His name still exists on spines and citations, perhaps. His office nameplate might be in a drawer somewhere. But names can survive after presence has gone missing. That is what frightens him. Not death as an idea. Not age as a calendar fact. The quieter fear is this, that he will become like the books no one pulls down anymore. Still intact. Still containing something. Still waiting. But untouched. He looks at the hardcover book in front of him. Its cloth cover is faded at the corners. The spine has softened from hands that once opened it without ceremony. Someone, decades ago, probably carried it across a rainy campus under a coat. Someone wrote a note in the margin, then changed their mind and erased half of it. Someone needed this book so badly that they checked it out twice in one semester. Now it sits under his palm like a witness. The undisciplined mind wants to turn the book into evidence of abandonment. It wants to say, this is what happens to everything. You speak, and the room forgets your voice. You teach, and the students move on. You give your best years to meaning, and meaning becomes a quiet shelf in the back. That kind of thought has a strange pleasure inside it. It wounds you, then offers itself as wisdom. It tells you that bitterness is honesty. It tells you that withdrawal is dignity. It tells you that if the world does not remember you loudly, then nothing mattered. And the body listens. His shoulders fold slightly. His fingers draw back from the book. His eyes stop seeing the library and begin searching the past. He sees classrooms filled with winter coats and coffee cups. He hears his own younger voice, sharper then, moving across the room with confidence. He remembers the students who stayed after class, the ones who challenged him, the ones who wrote years later. He also remembers the ones who forgot him immediately, because they were supposed to. They had lives to enter. They were never meant to remain seated forever. But fear does not respect proportion. Fear collects proof. It ignores the living parts and frames the emptiness. A disciplined person is not immune to that frame. The professor still feels it. His throat tightens. His thumb rubs the edge of the hardcover as if testing whether the world is still solid. He is not weak because the fear appears. He is human because the silence finally gives it room. This is the confrontation in P2, in Zanshin. There is no fire alarm. No public humiliation. No enemy walking toward him. The test arrives as stillness. The battlefield is the light beam. The opponent is the urge to leave the present and disappear into a private courtroom where the verdict has already been written, forgotten. Most people underestimate this kind of moment because nothing dramatic happens from the outside. An old man sits in a library. Dust moves in sunlight. A book rests on a table. That is all. But inside, a life is being interpreted. And interpretation can either wound or train. The careless reaction would be to reach for noise. He could pull out his phone and search his own name. He could check who cited him, who ignored him, who replaced him. He could measure his life through numbers too small to hold it. He could turn the library into a courtroom and the screen into a judge. Or he could leave, hurry down the steps, step into traffic noise, buy a coffee he does not want, and let the city cover the ache. None of that would be evil. It would simply be escape. Zanshin asks for something more exact. It asks him to keep attention inside the room before the mind flees it. To notice the dust before turning it into a metaphor of decay. To feel the hardcover under his hand before making it a symbol of abandonment. To smell the leather, hear the vent, see the last light on the table, and return to what is actually here. Because the present moment becomes a blade only when attention gives it an edge. He breathes once, not dramatically. Just enough to stay. The dust motes continue their slow, indifferent dance. They are not mocking him. They are not teaching him in words. They are simply visible because the light has arrived at the right angle. That is the first correction. Being unseen is not the same as being gone. Some things become visible only when attention becomes quiet enough. The professor's mind resists this. It wants a grand answer, a final proof that his life mattered. It wants a student to appear between the stacks, holding one of his old books, saying the perfect sentence. It wants memory to arrive with ceremony. But discipline in stillness does not demand ceremony. It accepts detail. The gold light on the edge of the hardcover. The worn grain of the table. The faint dust on his sleeve. The small sound of the building settling around him. The weight of his own hand, older now, less certain, but still capable of care. This is where the professor begins to see the difference between being remembered and being present. The fear of being forgotten pulls him away from the room. Presence returns him to it. Fear says, prove that you mattered. Zanshin says, attend to what remains in front of you with full respect. The book does not need applause to be a book. The library does not become empty because it is quiet. The dust does not become meaningless because no one names it. And a life does not become wasted because the crowd has moved on. But he cannot reach the truth by argument alone. He argued for a living. He knows how the mind can build beautiful cages. He knows how language can defend a wound while pretending to heal it. In this room, at golden hour, he must practice something older than explanation. He must look. Look at the beam of light without rushing to conclusion. Look at the hardcover book without turning it into his tombstone. Look at the empty chairs without calling them rejection. Look at his own fear without obeying its interpretation. That is the discipline of silent observation. Not passive. Not sentimental. Sharp. Patient. Exact. The professor keeps his hand on the book. He lets the smell of old paper and leather come all the way in. He notices that the room is not dead. It is layered. Every shelf holds the labor of people who are no longer here, and yet their attention still presses outward through the pages. Not loudly. Not constantly. But available. Maybe that is enough. Maybe the final insult is not being forgotten by others. Maybe the deeper loss is forgetting how to be present while you are still here. Discipline does not begin after you feel calm. It begins in the first second you realize you are about to lose command. For the retired professor, that second arrives quietly. No one sees it. No one applauds it. His hand is still on the hardcover book, his eyes still on the dust moving through the golden beam, but inside him something is reaching for escape. The mind wants to leave the library and search for proof. It wants to know whether his name still matters. It wants a verdict from the world. So the first practice is to stop before the old reflex takes over. He does not pull out his phone. He does not stand up. He does not turn the silence into rejection. He lets the first wave of fear pass through the body without giving it the keys. In his mind, he names it plainly, fear of being forgotten. No drama. No courtroom speech. Just the truth, said inwardly with enough precision to stop the fog from becoming command. That is the first cut of Zanshin. Name what is happening before it names you. His fingers return to the hardcover. Not roughly. He places the whole palm on it, feeling the cloth cover, the softened corners, the slight unevenness where years of hands have changed it. The book becomes more than an object now. It becomes a point of return. When the mind rushes toward the past, the hand comes back to the cover. When the fear tries to make the empty room feel like evidence, the palm answers with texture. Here. This table. This book. This light. He takes one slow breath through the smell of old paper and leather. He does not try to make the breath impressive. He lets it be small enough to be honest. The library does not need performance from him. Neither does discipline. The breath is only a way of telling the body, we are not leaving yet. Then he lowers his gaze to the page edge. Not the whole book. Not the whole shelf. Not the whole life. Just the page edge. This is how the battle shrinks. The undisciplined mind tries to solve the entire question of legacy in one painful moment. It asks impossible things. Was I remembered? Did I matter? Did my work survive? Did my students carry anything forward? Those questions may have their place, but not when they are being used as weapons against the present. So he chooses one action that fits the room. He opens the hardcover book. The sound is small, almost private, paper separating from paper, the spine giving a faint sigh. Dust lifts from the cover and disappears into the same gold air. He does not rush to read. He lets the book settle open under his hands. He notices the margin. A pencil mark. A sentence someone once underlined, lightly, as if afraid of hurting the page. This is the second practice: receive the object before demanding meaning from it. Most people handle the present like a tool they are impatient to use. They touch the cup while thinking about the email. They listen to a child while planning the answer. They sit in a room while living inside a future that has not happened. Zanshin trains the opposite. The thing in front of you deserves your full arrival. The professor allows the old book to be old. He allows the room to be quiet. He allows the dust to be dust. The fear still speaks, but it has lost some volume because the senses have taken their rightful place again. He reads one line. Then he stops. Not because he is confused. Because stopping is part of the ritual. Read one line. Breathe. Let the sentence arrive. Feel whether the body is still trying to run. Return the eyes to the page. Read another line. This is not a technique for becoming peaceful. It is training in command. The third practice is to keep the eyes loyal to what is present. When his mind begins to drift toward the classrooms of his past, he brings his attention back to the black print on the cream-colored page. When his chest tightens around the thought of being forgotten, he looks again at the dust crossing the light, one bright particle at a time. When the empty chairs begin to look like judgment, he notices their actual shape: wooden backs, worn arms, shadows under the legs. The room becomes less cruel when he stops making it testify against him. A man can suffer deeply from something that is not attacking him. A quiet library. An unread book. A fading afternoon. None of these are enemies. But an untrained mind can draft them into its private war. So he practices release. He releases the need for the room to comfort him. He releases the need for the book to prove his importance. He releases, for this one breath, the demand that memory arrive on command. Then he chooses the next right action: turn the page with care. That is all. Turn the page with care. There is no speech in it. No achievement. No public proof. But the way his thumb moves under the paper matters. He does not pinch too hard. He does not flip ahead. He turns one page as if the page deserves not to be rushed. In that small motion, his attention becomes clean. This is how ritual begins. Not with incense. Not with costume. Not with a grand identity. Ritual begins when a repeated action teaches the mind where to return. Hand to book. Breath to body. Eyes to light. One line. One pause. One page. Again. The fear of being forgotten will not disappear because he turned a page. Samurai discipline never asks for childish miracles. The mind may return to the old ache tomorrow, or tonight, or the next time he sees his own name absent from a conversation where it once belonged. But now there is a path back. A path made of ordinary things. The hardcover book. The golden hour. The smell of leather. The dust crossing the light. He can practice with ease. He can sit before the shelf and let the fear arise without surrendering the whole room to it. He can place one hand on the table and feel the grain under his palm. He can soften his jaw before bitterness hardens into a story. He can read one paragraph slowly, not to collect knowledge, but to honor attention. He can close the book gently when the time comes, not as an ending, but as a completed gesture. And perhaps most important, he can stop confusing audience with worth. A lecture hall is one form of attention. A citation is one form of memory. A student's gratitude is one form of proof. But there is another form, quieter and more demanding, the attention you give to life when no one is giving attention to you. The professor looks again at the dust motes. They appear only where the light touches them. The rest remain invisible, though they are still there. This does not make them worthless. It only means visibility is not the same as existence. He keeps reading. One line. One breath. One page. The ritual is almost embarrassingly small. That is why it works. It gives the mind no stage on which to perform despair. It gives the body a task clean enough to obey. It gives the fear a boundary. The world may forget parts of him. That is not fully in his command. But this moment is. And in this moment, the last reader is still reading. The light in the library changes before the professor does. Golden hour lowers itself along the shelves, moving from the upper rows of books to the brass labels, from the brass labels to the wooden floor, from the floor to the edge of the old table where his hand still rests beside the hardcover book. The room has not become warmer. The silence has not become easier. The empty chairs remain empty. But they no longer seem to accuse him. That is the first sign of transformation. Not happiness. Not a sudden rescue from loneliness. Just the quiet removal of a false verdict. A few minutes ago, every object in the Harvard-style library had been drafted into the same sentence. Forgotten, forgotten, forgotten. The closed book was forgotten. The shelves were forgotten. The dust was forgotten. And therefore, he believed, perhaps he was forgotten too. Now the same room gives him different evidence. The dust motes still move in the beam of light, but he watches them without making them tragic. They drift because the room breathes. They appear because the sun has lowered to the right angle. They vanish from sight when they leave the beam, but they do not cease to exist. The professor lets that simple fact settle without turning it into a lecture. For once, he does not need to explain the moment to possess it. His palm returns to the hardcover book. Earlier, the book felt like a warning, a preview of his own disappearance. Now it feels more like a companion. Old, yes. Quiet, yes. No longer handled by crowds. But not empty. Not defeated. It holds its pages without asking who will come next. He opens it again. The spine makes the same faint sound, but he hears it differently. Not as decay. As service. This book has opened for hands before his. It opens for him now. It may open for someone else after he is gone, or it may sit for years in a shelf of shadow. Either way, its worth is not decided only by the number of eyes upon it. That thought reaches him slowly. He spent decades in rooms where attention had a shape. Students in rows. Faces turned toward him. A hand raised. A notebook open. Even disagreement had warmth in it. Even boredom was proof that someone was present enough to resist him. He knew how to stand inside that kind of attention. But this is a different training. No audience. No title before his name. No introduction from a department chair. No young mind waiting to be guided. Just an old professor, an old book, and the golden hour exposing the dust. The transformation is not that he stops caring about being remembered. That would be false. A human life wants to leave a trace. A teacher wants something of the lesson to travel beyond the room. A mind that gave itself to books wants to believe that the giving mattered. Zanshin does not insult that desire. It refines it. The professor begins to understand that legacy is not something he can control by staring at the empty chairs. It is not something he can force by measuring citations, replaying applause, or rehearsing old importance. Legacy may continue in places he will never see. It may vanish from places he thought were permanent. It may live for one sentence in one student's memory, then become action without his name attached to it. And perhaps that is not failure. Perhaps that is teaching. He reads another paragraph, and this time he does not rush to connect it to himself. He lets the author speak. He lets the old paper carry its own weight. He notices the faint leather smell rising from the binding, the slight dryness of the page under his fingertips, the square of sunlight thinning beside his wrist. His attention has become less hungry. That matters. When attention is hungry, it consumes the present and still feels unfed. It looks at beauty and asks, what does this say about me? It looks at silence and asks, why am I not being praised? It looks at age and asks, what have I lost? Hunger makes every quiet room into a trial. But disciplined attention receives. It does not collapse the world into the self. It allows the book to be a book, the dust to be dust, the library to be a library, and the old man to be here without needing the room to prove his value. Across the table, a single dust mote drifts lower than the others, catches the light, and disappears against the dark edge of a shelf. Earlier, that would have hurt him. Now it simply passes. He closes his eyes for one breath. In the dark behind his eyelids, he hears the library more clearly. A distant page turning. A chair leg shifting somewhere far off. The soft intake of air from the vents. Outside, beyond the stone walls, the world keeps moving with its traffic, meetings, messages, and urgent little demands. Inside, nothing rushes. When he opens his eyes, he does something small. He straightens the hardcover book on the table. Not because anyone will notice. Not because the librarian requires it. Not because the gesture is symbolic enough to impress a camera. He straightens it because the book was trusted to his hands, and his hands still know how to show respect. That is the modern meaning of samurai discipline in this room. Not armor. Not conquest. Not becoming cold to age, memory, or loss. It is the ability to meet a quiet fear without letting that fear make you careless. It is command expressed through a small act of attention. It is the refusal to turn pain into negligence. The professor remains old. The library remains quiet. The world may still forget his voice in many places. But he has recovered a quality deeper than being remembered. He has recovered the power to attend. To read one line without fleeing. To touch one book without bitterness. To sit in a room where no one needs him and still behave as if presence matters. This is the opposite of the opening scene. At first, the closed hardcover book was a mirror of abandonment. Now it is a disciplined bell without sound. At first, the dust motes look like proof that all things vanish. Now they teach no lesson except the one attention is ready to receive. What is unseen may still be real, and what is quiet may still be alive. He turns one final page. The page does not praise him. It simply opens. And for the first time that afternoon, that is enough. The professor reads until the sun leaves the table. The light withdraws from the book, then from his hand, then from the dust. The room dims into ordinary shadow. Nothing grand has happened. No student has returned. No forgotten name has been restored to public honor. But the old man stands with more care than when he arrived. He closes the hardcover gently. He runs his fingertips once along the spine, not clinging, not saying goodbye to his whole life, only completing the gesture in front of him. Then he places the book squarely on the table, ready for the next hand, whenever that hand may come. The last reader is not the one who is remembered forever. The last reader is the one who stays fully present while the light is still here. You may never sit in that Harvard-style library. You may never place your hand on an old hardcover book while golden hour turns dust into a quiet procession. But you know the room. It appears after the meeting ends, when no one mentions your work. It appears in a kitchen after midnight, in a silent commute, in a classroom, in a hospital hallway, in a house where your effort has become familiar enough to go unseen. Every person has a shelf inside them where the fear of being forgotten waits. The practice is not to demand applause from the room. The practice is to return to the page, the breath, the object, the duty in front of you. So move with care. Speak with care. Close the book gently. And when the light is still here, be here. Mastery begins when the smallest detail becomes worthy of your full attention.